Reprise du débat, l'honorable député de Mont-Royal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in very strong support of the bill as reported back by the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, which I chair. I rise today in fervent opposition to the amendments brought forward by the member from Edmonton Centre. The member for Edmonton Centre, when he brought forward these amendments, stated that they had not been considered by the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. And that's true, and the reason why they had not been considered is because they would have been non-receivable at committee. You don't move at committee to strike a clause. You vote against the clause when it comes up before the committee. The committee unanimously, people from the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, and the NDP on the committee heard the evidence, and all of them decided to vote in favour of those clauses, thus rejecting the proposed amendments that are being brought forward by the member from Edmonton Centre. And I can only say that I hope that the House considers the hard work done by the committee and listens to the witnesses that came before us to tell us how important this legislation is. Mr. Speaker, did you know that 12% of Canadian women will one day be diagnosed with breast cancer? Now, that sounds horrible, but if a woman has the BRCA1 mutation, she has a 65% chance of developing breast cancer by the age of 70. If she has the BRCA2 mutation, she has a 45% chance of developing breast cancer by the age of 70. You also have more than a 30% increase in the chance of ovarian cancer. So these are dangerous things. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, if you could, that you were a 35-year-old woman. Your 40-year-old sister was just diagnosed with breast cancer and told that she has the BRCA1 gene. You have a history in your family of breast cancer. Your grandmother died of it, so did your aunt. You are of Ashkenazi Jewish descent, which means you have a 1 in 40 chance of having this mutation as opposed to a 1 in 800 chance in the general population. There is a test available, easily accessible, to determine whether you have the BRCA mutation. It would stand to reason, wouldn't it, that you would do this test. After all, if you found out you were negative, you would breathe a huge sigh of relief. And if you found out you were positive, you could take preventive action. You could do enhanced screening. You could get on the birth control pill, which reduces the chance of developing breast cancer. Or, alternatively, you could have a radical mastectomy that drastically reduces your risk of having breast cancer or other types of surgery. So, it would stand to reason it was an easy decision, right? But in Canada, the decision is not so easy. The committee, the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, and the Senate committee before it heard testimony from people in this situation that chose not to have the screening. They came up with reasons that they were looking for jobs and were afraid that a future employer would not hire them if they disclosed the result of this genetic test. She may have young children and be worried she won't get life insurance or disability or long-term care insurance because the insurers will not insure her or will give her prohibitive rates that she can't pay. You are worried that knowing you have this gene may lead to discrimination not only for you, but for close family members, perhaps for your children. Canadians should not ever have to worry about a decision that could save their life. When we heard from medical professionals that testified before the Justice Committee, they told us that a significant number of people in this situation refused to be tested, leading to a woman like the one I just described at 35, getting a job, getting insurance, and then dying of breast cancer at age 40 because she wasn't screened for the gene and didn't take preventive measures. People should not die in Canada because they're afraid to take a genetic test. And Mr. Speaker, this doesn't happen in other countries. Laws exist to prohibit genetic discrimination in most of the Western world. Criminal sanctions exist to prevent this in France, Austria, Germany, Norway, and Israel, amongst other countries. The law before us seeks to amend the Canada Human Rights Act, the Canada Labour Code, and to attach criminal penalties to requiring someone to submit to a genetic test or to disclose the result of a genetic test. The goal here needs to be able to protect people across the country. The amendments to the Canada Human Rights Act that the government supports are very nice, but they only apply to federal matters. This would leave the vast majority of Canadians unprotected. We need to be able to reassure Canadians from coast to coast to coast that they should not be afraid to get genetic testing for diagnostic or predictive reasons. In order to prevent the social evil of genetic discrimination, we need to make use of Parliament's criminal law powers. And protecting people here is not an insignificant issue. As of November 2014, there were over 24,000 tests for over 5,000 conditions, and these are increasing exponentially. Genetic tests will allow Canadians to live longer and healthier lives. Of all of the witnesses that came before our committee, the vast majority were in favor of the law. Medical associations, genetic associations, the Privacy Commissioner, and the Chief Commissioner of the Canada Human Rights Commission. The only ones who disapproved were the insurance industry and the actuaries. Yet they have known about this concern for years and done nothing to help resolve it. If those who vote to defeat the amendments and support the law as drafted will be doing the right thing when it comes to policy. But of course, the government has raised a separate issue that I want to deal with. It argues that the law is unconstitutional as it seeks to regulate contracts and insurance companies which fall under provincial jurisdiction. This position has been refuted by the majority of experts that testified both before the Senate and House committees, which included such luminaries as Bruce Ryder, Pierre Thibault, and Canada's foremost constitutional expert, Peter Hogg, who has been cited in over 1,000 court decisions. Federal criminal law power falls under Section 9127 of the Constitution Act of 1867. The leading case to define the criminal law power was the Margarine reference of 1949. In that case, Justice Rand of the Supreme Court of Canada said that a law passed using Parliament's criminal law powers has to have as its dominant characteristic the putting in place of prohibitions coupled with penalties for a criminal public purpose, such as preserving peace, order, or security, or promoting health or morality. The court importantly recognized that social evils change over time and that Parliament has to be able to deal with them under the criminal law power. In fact, over the last several decades, the court has emphasized that this is the broadest and most flexible of Parliament's powers. And we have used it in such varied areas as the Food and Drug Act, the Tobacco Act, the Environmental Protection Act, and securities legislation. In the Assisted Human Reproduction Act referenced several years ago, the court upheld very similar provisions criminalizing cloning or payment of surrogates. And I want to say, I saw the letter from the province of Quebec. The province of Quebec cites only this one case to say that it may be unconstitutional, when in fact that very reference came to exactly the opposite conclusion where the criminal law powers were upheld. So it is clear to me that the pith and substance of this law is to prevent the evils of genetic discrimination and not to regulate the insurance industry, which is not even referenced in this bill. I want to cite Peter Hogg's brief where he states, a valid criminal law involves three elements. 1, a prohibition, 2, a penalty, and 3, a typical criminal purpose. In the proposed Genetic Discrimination Act, all three ingredients are present. There is a prohibition of genetic discrimination, a penalty for breach of the provision, and the only purpose is to prohibit and prevent the evil of genetic discrimination. Mr. Hogg concludes, I agree completely that the proposed law would be a valid exercise of Parliament's criminal law powers. Mr. Speaker, when there is a dispute or debate about constitutionality related to criminal law in Canada, I would prefer to cite Peter Hogg than anyone else. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, I strongly support the bill. I think it is right when it comes to policy. I think it is right when it comes to the question of federal-provincial relationships. Someone needs to take the lead in this country to prevent genetic discrimination. Mr. Speaker, let it be this Parliament. Thank you.
Resuming